MRM Productions presents Rüneglaive, Sword of Heroes, Volume 1 of the Hero Sagas, a trilogy of high fantasy novels by Michael R. McLaughlin, read by the author. Rüneglaive, Sword of Heroes, Volume 1 of the Hero Sagas, written and illustrated by Michael R. McLaughlin. Book 1, Prologue 1, The Lost Tome of Ancient Magic. Maxendine the Great sat alone in the highest stone tower of his ancient keep. It was there, in his mystical laboratory, that the wizened wizard now spent the majority of his time. Quietly, peacefully, he read an ancient book as he sat in an embroidered chair, smoking a long meerschaum pipe, the bowl of which was carved in the fearsome likeness of a great red and black dragon. Blue-gray smoke swirled lazily about the wizard's hoary head as one long finger steadily traced the fading words across yellowed parchment. However, peace and tranquility had never been the close friends of Maxendine the Great, and their fleeting and tenuous visit was about to come to an end, for in the darkness beyond the embattled walls of Wizard's Keep, 3 enigmatic figures lurked in the shadowy night. A fierce steed chomped nervously at his bit, eyes smoldering like glowing coals as he pawed one massive hoof restlessly at the hard turf. Beside the sable mount, grey and black in the cold light of a green moon, crouched a large cat, a sinewy feline who snarled and fought at a leather harness that held him in check, and at the other end of the sturdy leash stood a tall man in heavy black robes. The young man's hard eyes surveyed Maxendine's impressive citadel, yet he smiled confidently to himself, for it was his belief that the old wizard had grown lax with age and ease, and that his own time had come at last. High up within the sturdy tower, the flickering light of Maxendine's oil lamp gleamed brightly in his eyes, a modest hint at the vibrant life still radiant within an aging but agile frame. The yellow flame shimmered softly on the smooth fabric of Maxendine's garb, like stars on a calm night sea. The strange opalescent colors of the silken raiment made the silver-haired sire seem a spirit who twinkled in and out of the aerythal ambit, for Maxendine wore the signifying robes of one who had spent his lifetime in the study of benevolent magic, and the wondrous and varied colors of the nacreous fabric bore testament to the fact that he had, indeed, mastered every aspect of what the elves called high truth, and, indeed, Maxendine was of the order Magus Magnificent. His silver beard was soft and thick and so long that it lay in curls upon his lap as he sat and perused the ancient book before him. His eyes were deep-set and furrowed with age and care, but the blue-gray orbs beneath thick white eyebrows shone brightly and twinkled with keen awareness. Although well hidden by his loose-fitting garments, the old sage's build was yet lean and strong. Yea, once he had stood the most lofty and proud among mortal men, descended in a direct patrilineal line from the house of Lieben-Melon, first of all magic-wielders. Yet, even for illustrious wizards, lo, even for Maxendine the Great, time will, eventually, claim its inexorable toll, and now the old magus sat bent with years, many, many long years. His broad shoulders drooped with the very burden of simply being. Indeed, local legend in Firmin, over whose township Wizard's Keep held stoic watch, maintained that Maxendine was none other than the great Silvermane of yore, a renowned wizard of local tradition, who was already old when the world was yet young, and, as some believed, was indeed older than writing itself. However, that was purely speculation, and little was known for certainty among the townsfolk of Firmin concerning Maxendine's age, except that he was certainly older than merely very old, and as mysterious as time itself, remembered by the eldest of their elders as an ancient wizard, even in the earliest memories of their own youths. Of course, to discern the true age and heritage of Maxendine the Great, one would do best to journey north to distant Asteria, where the long-lived high elves remember the past as if yesteryear were yesterday. There, in the Emerald Forest, Maxendine was well known, indeed, and remembered honorably by his many true and rightful titles: Ferloxolus Lilan, the great Silvermane; Lifer Mistforum, the ancient wizard; Lifer Aesterion, the silver wanderer, and by their most endearing term, Dreitik, Elf-friend, as they had long ago dubbed him. Verily, the star-children, at least, yet remembered Maxendine accurately and justly for the many brave and admirable deeds he had accomplished during his venerable life. The elves had not forgotten that it was he who had driven the rancorous hill-trolls from the chain-linked mountains ere the spring of great content, banishing forever the horrid flesh-eating creatures to the lands east of the Nasser. now more than 10 score and 15 years hitherto. Yea, for that magnanimous act, and for the many other great feats he had accomplished, not all in his much younger years, Maxendine was forever destined to be deeply revered and well beloved amongst the firstborn and their descendants. But alas, though greatly postponed by his craft, Maxendine was now beginning to feel the toll of those many, many taxing years. He was, after all, now truly ancient, even in the reckoning of the enduring elves of Asteria. For, though he was but a man by race, he was as old as their eldest high elven fathers, and still new to the world only in the eyes of the Dryad and the elder elves, who alone of Divinius's children yet remembered the first twinkling of the first stars, long ere even Adon, father of mortal men, erst walked the four realms. The dusky chamber in which Maxendine the Great sat he called his study, or laboratory, though it might better have been described as a library, owing to the countless books that lined its walls, shelves, cupboards, lintels, and were stacked upon tables, chairs, and even in random piles upon the floor in the corners and many alcoves. But books were not the room's most striking feature. Set apart from the other works of art that filled the crowded study, by reason of its central and prominent location upon an otherwise empty wall, hung a single striking elven tapestry of the most wondrous delight to behold, and, looking up from his book for a moment, Maxendine glanced at the ancient woven work, the effort of many nimble elven fingers and many patient years, and when he did so, the old wizard yearned for times and circumstances that would never be or come to pass again. It had been more than 2 decades since last he had visited the Emerald Wood, and more than 2 centuries since first he had beheld the enchanted homeland of the high elves of the forest, when he was still but a child. Hath it truly been so long an age since I was young, he wondered, for to him, and even the more so, as the many gathering years had ever more quickly faded into the past, his life now seemed but the briefest encounter with existence. Aye, he nodded to himself in wry acceptance. I suppose it hath indeed. As Maxendine sat reading that evening, enjoying his Asarian tragedy, he blew large rings of smoke from his bearded lips, savouring the rare and fine smoking tobacco. As he did so he smiled to himself contentedly. A token of his vast travels, the Asmire tobacco he smoked had suddenly brought to his mind that strange and remote land, where good pipe-weed brought more upon the marketplace scales than did the abundant nuggets of gold, or the innumerable gemstones and jewels so common to that marvellous realm. From time to time, as he read, Maxendine glanced over at a large bookcase that stood against the wood-panelled wall, to the right of the elven tapestry, directly across from where he sat. The dark oak cabinet held the wizard's most powerful magic scrolls and spell-books, and, upon its ornately carved top shelf, rested his most treasured possession, a large silver tome, its ancient vellum spine embossed with gold-leafed runes. Maxendine was the only mortal alive who knew that the sacred volume still survived, and he kept that secret well, for the silver book of spells was invisible to all mortal eyes save for his own. Even his apprentice, Zorwind, the one man he trusted above all others, and the only one with whom he was truly close, did not know about the existence of the ancient talisman of protection. This strict secrecy the venerable wizard deemed absolutely necessary, despite the taxing toll upon his being that such an ongoing spell exacted. For he knew that if the Skyward, as the large tome was named of old in the common tongue, were ever to be lost to malicious forces, the innocent folk of Indriel would be in the gravest of dangers. Indeed, discovery of its mere existence would surely portend the greatest doom for all men, elves, and dwarves. Not even the crystal crown of Lena Lornelon would be a more dangerous talisman in the hands of an ambitious tyrant, for, although the benevolent spellbook's complement, its evil counterbalance, the sorcerer, was still lost to the world, if ever it were learned that Maxendine had rediscovered the silver tome of protection, its malevolent, black tome counterpart would surely be sought out by every sorcerer alive and, inevitably, discovered. For yea, does not destiny invariably ever so seem to work? Now, the 2 terrible talismans had been, ages ago, lost to the world forever. Or so the wise had believed until Maxendine had accidentally discovered the Skyward. In his search for ancient written collections of wisdom, knowledge, and magic, he had realized then that if the Skyward could be found, why, so too could the sorcerer. Thus, 101 years ago, Maxendine had taken upon himself a secret quest, to find the sorcerer, and then to destroy the 2 powerful tomes together, to rid the world once and forever of the doomed God sends. Until then, he knew that his only chance at fulfilling his quest lay in keeping his discovery of the skyward an absolute secret, and so he had until that very night. Now, upon that particularly fateful evening, Maxendine was not studying one of his many strange spell books, neither was he meditating upon an ancient work of elder wisdom, nor even investigating an exceptionally intriguing history, but was, instead, enjoying a work of plain, ordinary fiction. A simple tragedy, written by Pleiades, a great author and poet of Assyrian antiquity, famed for his use of comedy amid sorrow. It was a rather random book in his vast library, a work of fiction recently acquired along with a few precious volumes of the previously lost imperial records of Asari, the only extant account of a civilization that had, long ago, blossomed and flourished during the first age of man, the age of art, only to decline and be destroyed during man's second age, the age of ignorance. Throughout his life, Maxendine had been too busy to enjoy for their own sake the lay books he had collected. He had devoted all of his time to studying his magic tomes and contemplating works of ancient wisdom and researching olden histories, ever in his ardent search for the sorcerer. But now, at last, Maxendine made the time for reading collections of poetry, grappling with philosophical treatises upon the nature of being, and for relishing his simple works of fine prose. He was old and tired now, and he had acquiesced at last to the inescapable fact that it was not his destiny to find the sorcerer. That quest he would soon pass on to his apprentice in magic, Zorwin the Young. Again, Maxendine smiled to himself as he thought of his apprentice's appellation. For who would now call Zorwin young? The man's flowing beard had already grown silver with long years spent in the learning of magic's many secrets. And yet Maxendine's novice was not old either, not very old anyway, not as was his mentor. There were yet a few dark streaks in Zorwin's hair, at the corners of his mouth, at his temples, and his thick eyebrows were still almost jet black. And, unlike Maxendine, Zorwin's frame was still straight and true, his gait strong and quick. And yet the outward resemblance between the two sages was so close that they might have been mistaken for brothers, though that they certainly were not. Over the years Maxendine had taught Zorwin much, passing on to him the secrets handed down from one generation of wizard to another, the charms and incantations that set events into motion, turned thoughts into reality, and transformed objects and beings. And soon now he would confide in his apprentice his secret knowledge of the rediscovered skyward, and turn the search for the sorcerer over to his one last faithful disciple. It was, at long last, time for Maxendine the Great to simply relax and enjoy his much-loved, much-treasured, musty old library, and his precious pipeweed, and his collection of curious trinkets and artifacts, and adore his art, and savor his well-earned leisure, and to reminisce upon a lifetime of colorful memories. He nodded to himself as he read his Assyrian tragedy and smoked his meerschaum pipe, again glancing up to check upon the secret talisman over which he watched. White rings of smoke floated lazily about his head and slowly drifted out a pair of open terrace doors at the far end of his study. In the distance the town bell of Firmin rang out the second half of the late evening watch, 10 deep resounding knells that echoed hollowly through the high towers of Maxendine's stone keep. His gaze went from the book he read up to the skyward and then back again to the tragedy's brittle yellow pages. Then, as Maxendine quietly enjoyed his overdue respite, he unexpectedly came upon the most important discovery he had made since recovering the skyward, a verse referring to the talisman for which he had sought so diligently for so many, many long years. It read, "When the last fair monarchs of Asavo, yea, even their majesties imperial, Landros the benevolent, imperator of Asavo, and Lady Landry, empress of Asavo, were laid to rest amongst the tombs of their allies, yea, verily, in the temple crypts prepared for the noble fathers of Asari, even in the very imperial chambers of Emperor Longsforth the Long-lived, potentate of Asari, lo and behold, the sorcerer was sealed therein with them, that it might be kept safe for all time and eternity from the ambitions of men." Pausing, Maxendine wondered whether or no this could possibly be true. No one had ever thought to look in Asavo's sister city of Asari for the ancient Black Tome. The two empires had fought together as allies against Sethton and his malign armies, and the sovereigns of both nations had been slain together at the end of the war, in the Battle of Kentry Plateau near Asari. Was it not then possible, even probable, that both Potentate Longsforth of Asari and Imperator Landros of Asavo had been interred therein together, below the temples of Diomond, in the Vale of Kings? Might not the lost tome of ancient magic have, indeed, been buried in Asari all along, with the two historic monarchs? But, before he could fully ponder the possibility of such a supposition, Maxendine felt a sudden strong flux in the network of magic, a sharp tug upon the mystic fabric of energy through which his life had been, for so long, so inextricably interwoven. Slowly he closed the novel and put his darkly colored pipe in its stand upon the oak trestle table beside his high-backed chair. The air felt full of static electricity, seemed to forebode, to those in tune with its signs and portents, some great event not yet revealed to time and to mortal men. Somewhere, very close at hand, Maxendine could sense a powerful magic wielder casting a formidable spell. Perhaps Zorwin practices his art, Maxendine tried to convince himself. But even as he considered this possibility, he came to sense that it was not just strong magic that was being worked that night, but rather that it was the dark arts in practice, and then he knew that it could not be Zorwin's enchanting that he had perceived. Anxiously, Maxendine dropped the Phaeatesian tragedy upon the floor and, with amazing speed for a man of his great age, raced towards the open doors of his high balcony. As he ran, he put his lips to a small silver whistle, which hung about his neck, blew upon it, and filled the still night air with a solitary high-pitched note that rang out like a crystal-clear elf clarion. By the time that Maxendine reached the open terrace, there, awaiting him, stood Radiance, the shimmering white, winged horse he had hailed. The large Alligerous steed pawed at the tiled balcony floor in readiness. Noble and proud, his snowy mane, braided like ermine, interwoven with fine silver threads spun in the enchanted furnaces of Feldsfar by illustrious low dwarves. In the stallion's eyes burned a white-hot fire, which crackled like lightning, for he too could sense something foul in the air. Maxendine did not use a saddle, for indeed Radiance needed one not. The silver-haired wizard simply leapt atop the sleek white back of the wind courser, and together they sprang from the high balcony into the cool night air and were aloft.